pharmacist, and I worked in a public pharmacy. In Germany we call it öffentliche Apotheke, which translates into pharmacy, but it's actually a private business. And in the humanitarian sector, and I felt a bit frustrated and understanding how global health works, how the German health system works. I felt that there has to be something more, and I felt like an alien during my studies already. And people called me a dreamer, and today being here I feel that at least I'm not the only one, to quote John Lennon. And so in the past two panels we heard about the global health landscape, how geopolitical power dynamics impact health outcomes. We heard some very frustrating testimonies about what wrong health governance can do. And we tried to understand who's got the power. In this third panel now, we are trying to answer the question who should have the power. And we want to look at it at two very different ways. But I think the most obvious answer to this question of power is money. And so I'm very happy to introduce my first panelist, who is Bodo Ellmers from Global Policy Forum. He leads the Global Policy Forum work on financing for development. He has coordinated the European Debt Relief campaigns for many years, and he's a member of the Council of Global Alliance for Tax Justice. In his presentation, he will shed light on the global debt and tax system, which we have already mentioned today, and he will present ideas on how to free the money for public health that is so desperately needed. Bodo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frauke. So indeed, my presentation is mostly about money, not so much about power, but unfortunately this is very closely related. We are, as the Global Policy Forum Europe, we are basically a watchdog organization for United Nations processes, so we also follow the pandemic treaty and other processes. My colleague Jens is the one in charge of our health work. I'm one of the non-health actors that they've asked you to engage with, because I mostly do our finance work on tax justice and on net issues. David, you also, I'm trying to pick up from some of the streams of discussion we had in previous sessions. You also made a good point saying we have to look at what ministries of finance are doing. So governments have to make very tough choices, and the poorer the country is, the tougher the choices are, because there's never enough money available for funding everything you want to fund. So, and of course, each dollar that the government allocates to debt service is a dollar not allocated to health services or so, and the other way around. So there are opportunity costs. And Chris also made an interesting comment about how the World Bank thinking evolved for looking at health spending from a consumptive expense to an investment expense. So in fact, actually for the Human Rights Council, from a human rights perspective, health spending is a human rights related expense. And the Human Rights Council has made very clear that there's a sort of primacy of human rights over debt service, so that governments have the obligation to allocate the maximum available funds to the basic services needed to fulfill their human rights obligations. That means actually governments should fund health services first, and only a residual amount of money would go to pay creditors. But in practice, we see in almost all cases the other way around. The government has to make a choice. They pay the creditor first, and basically health services are being cut, education is being cut, and this leads to a situation as we can see here. This is a graph I just stole from the UN Global Crisis Response Group, because I didn't want to do it myself, but we have a situation where basically half of the world population, 3.3 billion people, live in countries that devote more funds to debt service than to health spending. And this despite the idea of the primacy of human rights over debt service. There are, of course, that of course means, by that reduction, by that cancellation, you could easily double the money available for health spending. And we have good examples from the past. There was, for instance, the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative. There was a big campaign in the late 1990s, which tried to mobilize money for funds for the Millennium Development Goals. And actually worked. We got lots of that cancellation done, and we managed to increase increase public funds available for health and education spending. That was actually triggered by huge mobilizations on the streets. So there were 100,000 people in the streets, and at the G7 summits primarily in Birmingham, in Cologne. So it was actually driven by people. So we have evidence from the past that through debt cancellation, through actions, also by citizens, you can change the way how governments allocate money. But yeah, at the moment, unfortunately, we are seeing this situation. We have this situation. Interesting is to look at the graph, to read this graph there on financial transfers from the north to the south from the left side. So basically, you see in the orange part, you see transfers to private creditors. They have been positive for many, many years. Basically, this is what Anna explained in the previous session. So developing countries were pushed to attract private investment. This worked for a while. There was a lot of private money flowing in, but it was very expensive private money. So the consequence is actually, at some point, this investment stopped, and now they have to pay off extremely high loans. This shows with the orange graph that the net transfers from the north to south are actually negative. So in fact, the south is transferring money to the south, to the north. A bit frustrating for everyone who works on development cooperation issues is when you compare this also with the two graphs on the right side, because you see that bilateral and multilateral creditors, like the World Bank, they do still have net transfers for developing countries, but in fact, when you add this all up, these transfers are not financing development programs, but they're just enabling developing countries to pay their private creditors. They're just giving them the cash to pay off the private loans. So this is the situation we're facing now. This has been also a big issue at the UN Summit of the Future recently. President Lula addressed this. He basically called the situation a reverse Marshall Plan where the poor finance the rich. That's where we stand, actually. And I mean, the consequence when you aggregate all this is basically not just in health, this is to all other dimensions of sustainable development. We are actually, due to these net outflows we are having an increasing SDG financing gap, and it used to be 2.5 trillion per year in 2015 was estimated. It's estimated at 4 trillion now. So actually, we're making not much progress on this agenda. Yeah, this is also interesting. A key reason why there's so much money flowing out from the global south is simply the borrowing costs. I mean, Germany is an extremely privileged country in this regard. We have one of the lowest borrowing costs in the world, only comparable to countries like Japan or Switzerland. But when you look at the right side, I mean, these are average interest rates over the past 4 years. In Germany, it was 0.8% on government bonds. In Africa, the average rate is 9.8%. So this is also related to the presentation from Anna. There are hardly any private activities that you can find in a profitable way when you have so high financing costs. This is why all the hospital investors in Africa want to have so high profit margins, because they have to generate these yields, basically, because this is the cost of capital in these countries. And of course, it also leads to these enormous outflows from the global south. Yeah, perhaps also because I guess most of our audience here is German. Perhaps also some figures from Germany. As I said, we used to be very privileged. We could borrow for almost 10 years at 0 interest rates. This also resulted in very low interest payments. In 2021, the whole government of Germany only paid $2 billion in interest. But this, due to the rising interest rates over the past years, this increased by 1,500% in just 2 years. So now we're paying a little bit more than 40 billion, or we did pay in 2023. So if you're asking yourself why the German government is cutting, for instance, the development budget, or why we have these healthcare reforms where they want to save money, it is because they actually had to reallocate $37 billion. They had to find 37 billion euros in the budget to be allocated to debt service. And this money is coming from the other budget lines: humanitarian assistance, development, health spending. So it's all going to be reallocated to these creditors. So the situation is worse in the south, but even in Europe, we feel the impact of this. Then, what are the solutions? Let me present 3 main approaches. The one, because we have mostly a health audience here, is simply swaps, debt-to-health swaps. It's an instrument where a creditor agrees to cancel or release on debt, and the debtor then agrees to use their own tax revenue for additional health spending. So this is a debt-to-health swap. They also exist as debt-to-climate swaps or debt-to-education swaps. I must say I don't like them very much in my city economic justice scene. We also don't like this much, especially because it's basically the creditor dictating the benefiting country for what purposes to use money, I mean their own tax revenue, which is why my sector, the economic justice sector, we're not big fans of these swaps. But if you really want to mobilize money that would go to creditors in a very targeted manner for health spending, that the health swaps are a policy option. But then, of course, a broader one is simply debt relief or cancellation. There are, however, a few challenges related to this. A macro one is actually that in the 1990s, when we campaigned for, they had these Jubilee campaigns, most debt was owed to public creditors. Now we have this situation that's owed to private creditors. So when you campaign on public creditors, private creditors, you can put political pressure on the government to relieve the debts. That might work. Problem we have is the multi-development banks. They would need to have some sort of political agreement, legal provision to cancel debts. At the moment, there is no such agreement, so the World Bank or other multi-development banks cannot cancel. And the worst problem we have is that we need these private creditors, because there is actually no way to force them at the moment under the current regime. So we actually, in this regard, we're not campaigning so much on directly in the private creditors, because they don't respond to normative arguments. We're basically campaigning for debt architecture reforms. So we're campaigning for something like an insolvency regime or debt workout mechanism, where something like an international court could make a legally binding decision that would force creditors to write off their loans. I mean, this is really a broader governance innovation that is needed to make it possible that private debt owed to private creditors can be cancelled. Yeah, then who's got the power? I mean, an approach rarely used actually is simply debt repudiation. That's the most radical one, so debtors actually say we just don't pay. I mean, this is of course possible. I mean, transferring a debt installment to creditors is an act done by the debtor, so the debtor doesn't necessarily need to take this step. There are unfortunately relatively few examples. The most prominent one is more than 100 years old. This was the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution, where the government refused to pay any debts or loans taken out by the Tsarist government before. And since then, we have very few of these examples where debtor really repudiated. So that means the debtor needs actually political will and charisma to do that. And very few have this. There are also reasons for that, because creditors really don't like it when you don't pay the debts. So, so public creditors might impose sanctions on you. I mean, in the past, there was really literally gunboat diplomacy, so they were sending warships to collect the loans. But the problem we have now in practice is that private creditors simply litigate. I mean, they sue you, they go to New York courts, to London courts, and they sue you for full payment, and then there's a court ruling that all your assets in foreign countries are being seized. So that's the case, like for instance, the Argentinian president could not fly. She always had to use a private airplane to fly to other countries, because there was a lawsuit going on, and they would have seized her plane if she would take a government plane. So these are a bit of the sanctions that creditors are using, but yeah, I mean, I would say, given the implications of continuing to pay the debt when you're in a severe development crisis, and actually you kill people if you don't allocate sufficient money to health spending, I would say that repudiation is a legitimate option by indebted countries. Yeah, that's on this. I think I'm slowly running out of time. I like to talk about that a lot, so I've been working in this field for a long time. But few things on debt justice. I mean, here we also have two key problems. One is simply corporate tax dodging. According to the United Nations FACTI panel, tax dodging by transnational corporations deprives public budgets of about $500 billion annually. One of the worst offenders is the digital industry. You might have heard of Apple and registering Ireland and so on. I think almost the second worst offender is the pharmaceutical industry, because for pharmaceutical companies it's very easy to dodge taxes. So what you do, I mean, you work with patents. So you create a subsidiary firm in an offshore center, you register your patent there, and then you let all your firms, I mean all the firms in the countries where you produce or where you sell, pay very high fees for the use of the patents. And by doing so, you reduce your profits in a high tax jurisdiction to zero, and all your profits are generated in the tax haven. That means you don't pay taxes. So this is how pharmaceutical companies are doing it. And yeah, I mean, tax dodging is a problem in itself, but it's also related. We have the race to the bottom. So because countries are competing in this field, even the statutory tax rates are falling. They have been reduced for corporates from 8.2% in 2000 to to 21.1% in 2023. The second problem is the tax dodging by the super rich. That's an interesting graph which shows you average income tax rates for in 3 different countries in the global north, so Netherlands, France, and the United States. And you see that, I mean, basically it's a progressive system, but when you reach the 99% basically, so when you reach the highest 1%, it's quickly dropping. And when it goes to billionaires, it's dropping almost to zero, because billionaires have many different options to dodge income tax. So that's another huge source of loss of revenue. Coming to a few of the solutions or campaigns here, I mean, I just want to mention 2. The one is the campaign, I think that you also mentioned on the tax convention. We have, this was actually a big success of the tax justice movement, that we have now a process at the United Nations leading to negotiating the United Nations tax convention. This was also done by pressure of especially the Africa group at the United Nations. So we hope to get a UN tax convention on 2027. The idea for this is mainly to stop the race to the bottom, basically, so that to ensure that countries globally agree on standards to set taxes and stop this harmful tax competition. But the second point is also to allocate taxing rights fairly. So at the moment, big corporations, either they pay nothing in offshore centers or they pay in developed countries. So the idea is also to allocate more taxing rights to countries in the global south, so that they basically have more money available. We hope to get this through this United Nations agreement to be concluded by 2027. And the last big thing, I mean, this came up actually this year, very much driven by the Brazilian G20 presidency, is the so-called billionaire tax. Yeah, I mean, I think Brazil put this on the agenda. It featured now for the first time in the United Nations outcome document in the Pact for the Future, which has just been adopted last month at the United Nations. So I think this is also a huge success of our campaigns. Yeah, I mean, the revenue potential is enormous. I mean, there are different ways to model such a tax. There's one model developed by Gabriel Zuckman, an economist at the EU Tax Observatory in Paris. He basically suggested a wealth tax of 2% on just the 3,000 richest billionaires. And this alone would create an annual revenue of about US dollars 200 billion. So this is basically more than official development assistance combined with all donor countries. But there's also, you could also use a broader tax base, and Tax Justice Network, for instance, has done, has basically used the Spanish solidarity tax, an existing tax, as an example. And if you would apply this globally, an 0.5% wealth tax on the 0.5% which is households, you could generate 2 trillion in revenue per year, basically. So there is enormous potential. Tax justice reform, and I think I need to stop here, but this we should fight it. If you want to know more about these topics, we have some of the publications also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bodo. So assuming now we have a lot of money to spend, and I will invite Alan to tell us how to spend this money. Alan Rossi Silva holds a PhD in law from the Rio de Janeiro State University with a focus on the intellectual property system, access to health technology, and empirical legal studies. He is an expert in intersection of law and public health, and he's currently based in Belgium, where he coordinates the Pharma for Europe project from the People's Health Movement. And he will present this one today. And Alan,
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about public pharma, which I also like to talk, so I'll be mindful of the time. But before that, I would like to address the topic of big pharma. Just a brief statement, because I don't think we should waste our time today talking about big pharma. We're talking about how to challenge big pharma, and the idea here is to provide a very concrete way forward, and I hope you like the idea and join us in this fight. Well, I brought first two slides on the systematic failures of Big Pharma. And of course, Big Pharma is a success for their shareholders, right? But we are talking here about the systemic failures, the ones that affect us, in fact. But again, I don't want to waste our time talking about these failures because I think everyone here knows about them. And if you don't know an example or something like this, we can talk afterwards, but today I decided to not give you the 100 examples that we can find in our history because we are always fighting against it and we have only 15 minutes. Well, let's talk then about public pharma. So what is our topic here today? What do we want to achieve with public pharma, in fact? Health sovereignty. And here I'm going to focus on each line because I think it's important and each line is meaningful here. Health sovereignty, reduction of big pharma's power, increased democratic participation, promotion of international cooperation, holistic health approach, alignment of R&D with public health needs, mission-driven innovation, affordable and fair pricing, sustainable access to health technologies, transparent and evidence-based clinical trials, not evidence-biased clinical trials as we see today, ethical prescribing practices, regulated and safe pharmaceutical markets, better working conditions in the pharmaceutical sector, and sustainable environmental practices. So these are some of the goals that we believe we can achieve with a public pharma model, a counter model to big pharma model that we see today. But what is public pharma in the end? Because it seems to be like amazing. We can achieve everything through this thing called public pharma. It would be amazing. Let's talk about what is public pharma then. But it's not so easy. Because I would say that we have basically three groups of approaches to public pharma today. The first approach is against public pharma, as you can expect. People who think that the current system works fine as it is today. People who think that its problems, if you admit that there are problems, they are justified, they are unavoidable or even acceptable. And also people who think that private sector can handle these issues on its own. But again, we are not talking about these people today. If one of you here today think like this, we can discuss afterwards, but today we are not talking with you. The second group is varying degrees of neoliberalism, and this is serious. We are going to address them. Why? Because why we are not addressing people who are against public pharma, but we are addressing these varying degrees of neoliberalism, because I think this is a serious issues which are entrenched in our movement too. So we need to be aware of these ideas, of this ideology, even within us who are fighting against neoliberalism. So today the idea is addressing the various positions that believe that the states are considerable incapable of performing certain functions and or public pharma should be limited to address my favorite expression, market failures. And third, what I personally defend, as you can imagine, because I'm biased calling it real public pharma, but I made this slide, so I can't do it. So the state plays a central role safeguarding the right to health. And we can see it clearly in various presentations here today about the central role of states. So the focus of my presentation today is challenging the neoliberal concept of public pharma. Challenging who holds the power today in the global health governance. And here, I could have drawn that, but I think it's a table is enough. We have, on your left, different aspects. I would call it degrees, because you can combine. Maybe some of you can think, no, this
I do not agree with all the new liberal perspectives on public pharma, but one or two would be acceptable. So that's why I'm calling various degrees of public pharma. New liberal perspective of public pharma. And on the right, you can see my conception of real public pharma. So, just a few examples. Instead of fighting for a public pharma that is just a complement to big pharma, I defend that we should fight for a public pharma which is really a counter model to big pharma. And then you should just think, what is big pharma? Big pharma is a transnational corporation and blah blah blah. What is public pharma? Everything in the opposite direction. This is what I'm calling real public pharma. So, some people would say that public pharma should be any policy, governance mechanism, strategy aiming at promoting the right to health. I'm already tired. You know, like this is diluting the concept of public pharma, and we are losing the power of what is public pharma in the end. For me, it's clearly real public pharma is simply a state-owned, publicly accountable infrastructure. Some people would say that public pharma should be limited to the initial stages of health technology development, like basic research, leaving the profitable stages to private companies. Blah, blah, blah again. Public pharma should encompass the entire process, research, development, manufacturing, and distribution of health technology. One institution, a combination of institutions, public-public, this is the only PPPs we are talking today here, public-public partnerships, and etc. An ecosystem, a single institution doesn't matter. But we should not constrain the action of public pharma, not at all. Public pharma should focus only on health technologies that do not attract big pharma's interest. This is my favorite one. Like vaccines, antibiotics, etc. Again. Public pharma should address any type of health technologies, responding only to public health needs. Of course, we cannot address every health technology at the same time, but we need to be accountable only to public health needs. Public pharma's role should be restricted to health emergencies like COVID pandemic, etc., or diseases neglected by big pharma, rare and neglected diseases. Instead, I believe we should think of a model, a counter-model of pharma that responds to any health situation, any disease. Again, according to public health needs. And finally, highlighted in red, you can see that public pharma should patent its inventions according to some. And the title they gave me to speak included patents. That's why I highlighted this one. And this is the area that I like the most to speak. That's why I left only 5 minutes to talk. But it is very dangerous. And it's something that we should not overlook in our conversation here today. Because we have many fake justifications, I'm not going to it, of patent system throughout history. The discussion is the same since the 19th century. But one fact that I'd like to share with you here today is all the justifications, all the fake justifications came after the implementation of the patent system. We never had a situation where, what's the best model to innovate, to foster innovation in the world? Never. What we have is a political, economical decision, not evidence-based as it was already stressed. But here I would like to provoke. Everyone knows that. Big Pharma does not believe that the TRIPS waiver is evidence-based. So I do not believe that we should go to the WTO and tell them, let's write a report and inform them. Look, there is no evidence-based. You are only giving money to Big Pharma and power to developed countries, in case you don't know that. Oh yes, really? So let's change the TRIPS agreement because it's everything new to me now. I think it's a matter of strategy. It's not our focus here today, but I think it dialogues with many other interventions, and I think it's a good conversation for the coffee part. But again, and lastly, sorry for that, for taking too long, but public pharma should never patent its inventions, ensuring that innovations remain in the public domain and accessible to all. And I will not address here, maybe you ask me and then I'll be happy to have more time, defensive patents. It's my favorite one. Because for the first time in history of intellectual property, a new justification of intellectual property is coming from civil society. For the first time, we are saying that, okay, I do not agree in these fake justifications, but here, civil society has a new proposal of justification, a philosophical utilitarian justification. We need to defend public inventions from big pharma. It has no merit. No merit. And it's very dangerous that the first time in history we are advocating for a new justification of intellectual property, more specifically of the patent system, and I'm happy to discuss it further with you. Just to finalize, I have four more minutes. 3.5. Let's move from conceptualization and discuss action. This is a summary of the proposal I had in mind. That is identifying existing public pharma initiatives and potential models. And after identifying them, we can have 3 different actions. Establishing new public pharma infrastructures, protecting mostly from austerity measures, and I know what's happening in Brazil too about that. We have plenty of examples of public pharma and they are suffering from austerity measures, heavy austerity measures, and expand. So if we have a public pharma which is focused on research and developing, why should we not expand that to manufacturing? Or if we are focused on a specific type of medicine, why shouldn't we focus on other types of health technologies? And then this is the idea of expanding. And I'm sure that in each country we are going to find many examples, many opportunities to work together. And here I'd like to share with you, just to finish, Frauke, the initiative we have now, and we have many members here today, so it's an honor to be talking about that with you, because we are about to launch officially this coalition that is called Public Pharma for Europe Coalition. And you see that everything is still an ongoing process, so be patient, but you can already follow us on social media if you want. There is nothing there yet, but you can. And this is the definition of our coalition and what is this coalition. And in summary, it says that we accept everyone except for-profit initiatives. This is the summary. And this is a picture that I'm very proud to share with you, which is a picture that was taken in our conference in March in Brussels, where we created this coalition. And many of these people are here today. And just to show you that we have many people engaged in this process, and I hope you all consider to join us in every capacity you have, because we need a real movement. Not only delivering statements at multilateral organizations, not only writing open letters, not about that. We have to get together and see what are our own capacities to influence the political fight with real power to achieve public pharma in Europe and worldwide. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan, and also Bodo. I think, very good on time, perfect. I think we have a lot to discuss now. There might be some questions, comments, controversies, and we have 8 to 10 minutes left before the official program ends. So I will not take too much time and will open to the audience.
I think my voice carries. So, Veronica Thiel again.
Use the mic.
Right, okay, cool. So my question would be, I'm really interested in the patent discussion. I know that it's mostly Bochum to say that that drives innovation. But my question would be, what sort of incentives would drive the public pharma? Is it going to be taxpayer funded? What's sort of the financial structure around it in a nutshell?
Okay, I have Dave and Anna. Maybe you collect
One question each. Bodo, I'm interested, are you, or is anyone tracking the response of billionaires to the proposals by Zuckman and others? And in particular, has anyone tracked how Gates has reacted and responded? And then Alan, just evidence of TRIPS and intellectual property rights being inefficient to create innovation is one thing, but I think there's a lot of good evidence that the alternative is efficient and can be innovated, both in pharma but also in other areas of research and development. The Human Genome Project is one example that was talked about in one of the Global Health Watches, human models, etc. Is this something that you're trying to collate to produce evidence about efficiency and effectiveness of the public approach?
Thank you, Anna from Oxfam. Alan, please tell us why you are against defensive patents. And also, could you share any opinions on the mRNA technology transfer program supported by the Medicines Patent Pool and the WHO, and whether you think that this constitutes an alternative public model?
Just repeat the second question.
The mRNA technology transfer program with the kind of the partnership approach based in South Africa with partners in Brazil and in other countries supported by WHO, do you think that that constitutes a public option?
Hi, Victoria Saint from Bielefeld University. I think one of the other interesting examples, my background is equity and social determinants, and in the last few years I've been looking specifically at the antimicrobial resistance sector from a political science and public health perspective. And I think one of the other interesting things that came up in those discussions was the example where Germany actually did try to work with, it links a bit to what the previous question was, but the German government actually did fund a setup of an entire manufacturing system for the COVID vaccine with the German developed vaccine in South Africa, or in, exactly, Rwanda. And no one bought the product. So the high-income countries weren't willing to buy the product, but the low and middle-income countries were also not willing to buy the product, and even the countries where it was being manufactured were also not willing to use that product. So I like the idea of, I'm 100% on former People's Health Movement Australia, and I'm 100% on board with the ideas of moving this, but I think we need to think about how we manage real and unreal perspectives and perceptions and expectations around things like quality control and accountability within making safety mechanisms around things like pharmaceutical products and diagnostics and so forth. And that's an area where it becomes quite technical and not ideological, but we haven't got a lot of work in those fields showing really good long-term sustainable quality control mechanisms where it's done at public service ownership level. At least not in the modern market the last 20, 30, 40 years.
My response is quick, David. I don't know anyone who's tracking billionaire responses to the proposal. The proposal is also very new. It really came up this year, but it was really hitting all forums. Interesting, what should be said to the foundations, of course, everyone should be aware that what the Gates Foundation is giving in grants is essentially unpaid taxes. This should be... perhaps I mean, I've been working for an organization for many years that works through this on both on official development assistance and on tax justice. Gates was funding a lot of our work on MGA, but never funded our work on taxes. So it was actually quite, I don't know why, but yeah, I mean, but I've never seen an official response so far.
Could also be a response. Okay, then Alan, your stage.
Yes. I will start by the defensive patents because there's this topic, because I think it's one of the hot topics when we're talking about what to do then. And first, I will bring to the debate something that's simply overlooked, and I think people are aware that it's not. We are not talking about that, and they are convinced that we should be talking about that. But I'm convinced, in the contrary, that we should be talking about the immoral aspect of patents. So I think we defenders of human rights, etc., we are creating a pragmatic, strategic, you call it as you want. It's not strategic at all because we have 30 years of TRIPS agreement and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, we are giving up on the moral argument. And I think, first of all, it's immoral to have property over knowledge. And I think we should not overlook this important topic of this discussion. That's why I'm against defensive patents and any type of patents. And I personally see, maybe you don't have to agree with that, but I see public pharma as a strategic move towards a world without patents. That's why it does not make sense to focus on voluntary measures and also on defensive patents, saying that we need or can use the system in a constructive or balanced way. I'm personally against that, because I think it would be an immoral and questionably strategic way of dealing with that. But pragmatically speaking, some people argue that we should use why defensive? Because then we have a public pharma infrastructure that developed a new medicine. And then this medicine could be patented by big pharma. The fact is, we have to fight for the public domain. We have a new technology, and we publish this new technology in the market. And there are a lot of counter-arguments and arguments that I think I don't have the time here, but the essence of my argument is, if we develop a new medicine and we put this in the public domain, it cannot be patented anywhere in the world. So we should have a knowledge management policy that would defend the public domain, and any person in the world could reproduce this technology, but never appropriate it. This is the essence of the pragmatic side of that, putting everything in the public domain, and putting all our belief and our energy in collaboration seriously, not only just voluntary measures that we are going to selectively collaborate. Real collaboration, as we saw glimpses or seed of that during the pandemic. But I have only more 45 minutes, sorry. And I agree that there are plenty of examples of efficient models that could be alternative, etc. And this is an extremely important topic. I think we should explore this together. And money, funds, because it's something important. We have plenty of discussions around that, different models. We have a report from the European Parliament written by Massimo Flori from the University of Milan is an example, but it could be a tax, it could be the money that we already have invested in private pharma, de-risking private enterprises, coordinating it, stopping diluting it in many grants, and focusing on public pharma. This would be another model, but we have different approaches to that, and I cannot address to this.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Andreas just friendly extended our time for a little bit. So if there are any further questions or comments, please go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Albert Jan from Heidelberg University. Again, thanks for your excellent presentation. It's just a rather concrete question. If we look back at the idea of public pharma, that has been there, especially in the area of vaccines. Vaccines in France have been produced by the Institut Pasteur. In Germany it was the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, and these were all basically privatized in, I don't know exactly, 90s, So we have models, but where I see a problem, and it's a question to you, this model needs a buy-in from the state. You know, the state has to take up production or provision of medicines as a state obligation, like providing primary education. So, and there, how would you basically manage, from the current state where we are, we need to bring in the state in his central role. I think you cannot create public pharma around the state and the government that does not want it.
Thanks so much. Also a question on that, if I may, following up precisely on that last point by Albert Jan on states that do not want, right, this alternative model. One case in point, disclaimer, of course, I'm a foreign resident in Germany, I'm grateful to the country, but nevertheless, one example that brings to light the fact that these private interests and the public are not strictly separate, but they come together, right, in this field. For instance, right, the intellectual property regime, patent rights, allowed BioNTech, for example, the German company that developed the first effective vaccine against COVID-19 to make billion-dollar profits together with Pfizer. Thanks to these profits, BioNTech, which is located in Mainz, a city in Rheinland-Pfalz, paid so much tax to the city, to the local government, that this local government overcame its debt that had been accumulated throughout decades. And they were, of course, quite happy with this development. The public, right, this public interest was quite happy with the patent system. And my question is, following up on that, how to really overcome this current symbiosis between the public and private that we see with the patent regime.
Hi, this is Rosa Jan again from the Heidelberg University, and I want to follow up on these 2 points. It's all aligning really well. So I think that this is where evidence comes in, and I know that you kind of dismissed evidence a little bit, but I think that there's a different way to think about the kind of evidence we need, because it is well known that TRIPS doesn't foster innovation, but it was never designed to foster innovation. It was designed as an economic tool to subsidize and protect a specific industry. And it did that, it does that to some extent quite well. But I think the kind of evidence we need is that the way that TRIPS protects the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, is not in the public interest. For different reasons, for political reasons, it gives too much power to a private actor in an area that is so crucial to public interest, an area of health, and it doesn't produce outcomes that are in the public interest. So that's why I think where evidence needs to come in is to get into that marriage of public interest and private interest in the pharmaceutical sector. And there's this basic understanding that what's good for the industry is good for the state. What's good for biotech, because it gives Mainz, the city of Mainz, so much income, which is great. At the same time, it's not in the public interest and not in the state's interest, because of the expenses that the state of Germany, for example, had to then buy those vaccines. And there's all kinds of evidence out there around that. But really bringing it together, I think that's where something like public pharma can become possible, is if you really always look exactly for what can we point to where protecting industry and having TRIPS no longer aligns, or where it really hurts the state interest, the public interest, and the state economic interest as well. I think that's where the argument for public pharma becomes really strong. And that's health sovereignty, but that's also an economical argument I think that can be made. Like you also alluded to already. Sorry, I don't even have a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you want to go on? Coming?
Well, yes. So first, I think we talk a lot about the neoliberal ideology, but sometimes we have difficulty to identify it in the discourses. We can talk about something, we can name it, but sometimes it's so entrenched in our day-to-day lives that we do not recognize them. My argument is that when we say maybe states can't assume some responsibility, or when we say that states do not want to assume certain responsibilities, especially here in Europe, we are talking about the dominance of the new liberal ideology, simply put. And it was well addressed during the whole event. And the response to that is overcoming new liberal ideology in the political debate. So, I'm talking here from a civil society perspective. So we need to understand what's our role, and then this is another presentation, how we can do that. I've been thinking a lot about this point, and I think that we have collectively to debate it. But I have no doubts that we have to address this new liberal consensus, and it's our responsibility to do that, instead of just saying, let's write a new statement, let's write a new report, which are incredibly important. I'm not saying against it. But it's a new liberal conception that we are going to convince these bodies. We are going to persuade these people who are earning materially a lot of money with these transactions. So I think this is the recognition of the new liberal ideology and our duty to overcome this in our timeline. And this is, in my opinion, it addresses your question too about the symbiosis, the supposed symbiosis, because some people will say there is no difference between the public and the private interest, and other people will say that there is such a symbiosis that you can't see the difference. But the fact is, as it was well pointed out, the TRIPS agreement is a new colonial tool. Everyone here, or almost everyone here, can agree with that. So the point of the TRIPS agreement is being made. It's a success, and to finish, it really troubles me when we lost the TRIPS waiver debate, which was not abolishing patents, not at all. And then we said every single organization, or almost every single organization, we are disappointed with WTO. We are not disappointed with WTO. We know what the Bretton Woods institutions were created for. We know why the TRIPS agreement exists, and we are not disappointed with them. We knew that the change was not coming from TRIPS waiver, the change is not coming from WTO, and we know that. But since we don't have another alternative, maybe, we try to believe in that, and this is my contentious opinion.
Thank you, Alan. Maybe before we close the session, I hand over to Andreas. Would you like to comment on Anna's question regarding the mRNA transfer?
It was generally a statement against voluntary measures.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And if you want, there's much time to discuss.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all the speakers. My task is now not to wrap up, but basically leave you very soon to our reception because we are running behind. And but I will wrap up a few notes that I have done in less than 5 minutes, I hope. So please again have a look at our statement that Julia referred to from 2009, criticizing the very first global health World Health Summit, because this, as Julia said, really encapsulates a lot of things, even if the World Health Summit has changed, as Maria has shown to us in her presentation. Still, the question is who holds the power also of discourse, who holds the power about the meaningful discussions, and who sits on the panels is very relevant. So Dave, of course, you gave us a big tour on the global health governance issues, and I found it interesting that your accountability model, and I will not recall it, but you made it very clear that it must be a social and bottom-up process rather than something that you delegate only to the state institutions. Yeah, well, Maria, I said the interesting thing is that there has been a lot progress done on gender balance in the World Health Summit, but at the same time, the people who are speaking basically come still from high-income countries, which is really questioning the point if there is a World Health Summit indeed, or what part of the world is speaking to each other on such an event. I think this is a very important issue. With Pedro, I found it very interesting also because, of course, your position in a very serious research foundation, which is basically also advising the German state. This is what the SWP is doing. This is very interesting how much you have insight into the political processes and how skeptical you still are that also something like the patent issues that could be really integrated into the pandemic treaty, and what we see is rather that the negotiations tend to avoid the sticking points, leaving it to maybe some processes later, but definitely that reminds us that these are very thick, we say in Germany, what is it, the English word, you have thick bowls to bore. Letter to bore. I don't know what the English expression is. That's not so important maybe. And that reminded us of the powerful financial actors, and that these often gets forgotten, and particularly also challenging that there is not only politicians who do politics, but there's a lot of other people at that moment. And also thank you for reminding us that even if we are sitting here in a rather protected area, there are places in the world where people are really fighting for their lives and being terrorized. And for all of you who are still in Berlin, next Friday there will be a manifestation where a lot of NGOs are calling for ceasefire, release of hostages, and also a stop of weapon procurement into the conflict area of Gaza and Lebanon and Israel at the moment. So this is next Friday, 5 p.m. in front of the Chancellery, if we are allowed to go there, because Joe Biden also has announced his coming there. So Bodo, I like from you, it's 5 p.m. I said 5 p.m. next Friday. There is a reverse Marshall Plan in action. I think this is a good way of thinking about, and of course the taxing the rich is something that we should keep in mind, and you call very strongly for. And Ellen finally, of course, put us all on a very vibrant path to really defend the public health. And in this public pharma coalition, and I think you made it very clear that you need much more support. Until now, I found the health sovereignty concept might be also interesting to elaborate more on the next session, so this will not be the last time that we are meeting around maybe this time next year. I must thank now, with the final wrap-up, of course, also all the people who have contributed to it, all the moderators, all the people behind the scenes. Thank very much to our technical support here, which Stefan is not here any longer, and of course our team at the bar, which is still there with the corkscrew yet, so that you will have a time and we will have a chance to get some red wine. The white wine is without corks. So please stay a few more moments. We can extend until 7:30, so we don't need to. But also then we slowly have to start to clean up. Thank you very much also for the wonderful place of the Staatsbibliothek here in Berlin, which is a very public space that's why we could afford it. Also thank you to this, and thanks to Bread for the World and Medico International, who were the funders of this event. And it was possible to have a free event because of the public basically the private people who fund Bread for the World and Medico. So this is not state funded. It's a public initiative done by Medico and Bread for the World, together with all the other actors of the German Platform for Global Health, so which have contributed a lot to this successful event. And then, if you don't have to hurry to Mr. Tedros and his investment round event at 6 p.m. in the Marriott, please stay and enjoy and exchange and grill the speakers further with all your questions. Thank you very much.